Is that better?
Miles Davis.
Thanks. I'm Tom Goring. I'm Executive Director of the Sacramento Water Forum. Thanks for inviting me. I am really not happy to be here to talk about this because the situation is really bad. I am very grateful that you've invited someone with a local perspective to talk about how we're dealing with things, really right where the rubber meets the road. And hopefully my slides will help paint that picture a little bit. So first of all, when I talk about the Sacramento region, I'm talking about Sacramento, Placer, El Dorado counties. Before you get into the mountainous areas, that's the part of the county I'm talking about, and I'm talking about the cities listed there: Sacramento, Roseville, Folsom, and communities of places like Granite Bay, Fair Oaks, Rancho Cordova. Those folks, there we go. Those folks all got together in the 90s and created something called the Water Forum. That's the outfit that I work for. We're a non-entity. We're not a joint powers authority. We're not a public agency. We're not a nonprofit. We only exist as long as we're providing value to the folks in the region. And this Water Forum thing is made up of 4 caucuses. We have a water caucus, a public caucus, business caucus, and environmental caucus. For the most part, it's really the Water Forum is based on a truce that was signed in 2000. It was negotiated for almost a decade. And the agreement was a series of gives and gets between the local environmental community and the local water community. And the Water Forum was the first organization to coin the term co-equal objectives. And our co-equal objectives were to provide a reliable water supply for this region until the year 2030, and to protect the environmental assets of the Lower American River. And so they created this agreement. They said the agreement is non-binding, it's voluntary, anyone can leave at any time. And recognizing that, they said it will probably only hold together if they kick some money in every year and have a small staff to be custodians of the agreement, and to implement a series of programs or projects. And those are our programs listed there. Do I need to do? There we go. So my purveyor members, my water supplier members, look at the region this way. They see the Folsom Reservoir over here. I can go off screen. I can't go on screen. There you go. Folsom Reservoir here, and the American River and the Sacramento River as a source of water. There are over 20 different water purveyors in the region. Some of them, like Natoma Central Mutual Water Company and the city of Folsom, derive all of their water supplies from surface water. Others, like Rio Linda and Del Paso, the big oval you see in the middle there, get all of their water supplies from groundwater. The remainder have a mix of surface water and groundwater. Some of them, like Sac Suburban Water District, here right in the center of the box there, SSWD, they have a completely dual system. They have the ability to take surface water in wet years and in lieu bank their groundwater. And in a year like this, they will take no surface water. They'll rely completely on their groundwater. It's a true conjunctive use strategy. Other folks, like the city of Sacramento, although they have a mix of surface and groundwater, their surface and groundwater systems serve different parts of their service area. So they can't switch to groundwater as an alternate supply. My Enviro members see the region like this. They think of from their perspective, the Water Forum exists to protect the Lower American River, to protect it for fishery, to protect its salmonid species, and they are delighted that the Lower American River is considered the crown jewel of the Sacramento region, that it's part of the American River Parkway, and that the American River is protected under the Wild and Scenic River statutes, state and federal statutes. So you've heard about what the problem is. Liz showed you a slide sort of like this. This is the drought outlook. Looks bad for the foreseeable future. Liz showed you this slide. The takeaway message is, from a precipitation standpoint, for this water year, which is only the last 4 or 5 months, we're lower than we were in 76, 77. The thing that this graph doesn't tell you is that when you combine that with the essentially no precip for all of 2013, we're in many ways worse off today than we were in 76, 77. This graph shows our snowpack in the central part of the state. The blue line on the top is the wettest year. The black smooth line in the center going in here is average. The red line at the bottom is 76, 77, and the cyan, is that cyan or magenta? The pink line is our snowpack today, and it's just flatlined. And when you combine, and it's slightly higher than we were at this date in 77, but in 77 you see an uptick right in here in February. Our forecasts say we're not going to get that. It's going to stay flatlined for at least another 30 days, maybe longer. And finally, from our perspective, because so many of the purveyors in this region are either wholly or partially dependent on the storage in Folsom Reservoir, this graph scares the crap out of us. This blue, the red line here is storage in Folsom during 1976-77. The blue area there is average storage as you go through the year, months along the bottom here. And the blue line is storage today. Folsom has been lower than it is today. It has never been this low on this date, ever. And if you do a simple extrapolation, it just keeps going down. Now, people who do projections don't do a simple extrapolation. They look at statistics, and you hear them say things like, what would a 90% forecast look like, a 50% forecast? Liz had some of those numbers. The people who do those kinds of forecasts find those kind of analyses completely useless right now. We are so far off the book that history will not give us any clue about what is going to happen over the next 6 or 9 months. This is brand new. And Mr. Eisenberg, to answer your question, we have never experienced this before. Our history of dealing with these kinds of years leaves us no clues as to how much worse it will get. Why is that so troubling to see the reservoir go that low? Well, when it goes below 322,000 acre feet, the cities of Folsom, San Juan Water District, and the city of Roseville can no longer get sufficient water out of the reservoir to meet their historical summer supply. They can meet supplies right now because their winter supply is so much lower. There's virtually no outdoor irrigation. We're already below that point. But we could easily reach this point. At about 90,000 acre feet, they can no longer take water at all from the reservoir. And there are, again, all of the city of Folsom, the community of Granite Bay, about 80% of the city of Roseville are completely dependent on this surface water. Big problem. Then the final problem is because supplies are so meager, as Liz mentioned, we have been cutting flows on the Lower American River. On January 6th, the Lower American River near Sunrise looked like that. We were at 1,100 CFS. 5 days later, it looked like that. Here, can I cycle back there? From there to there. We cut the flow over half, and we are expecting, Reclamation is not in a position to make a projection right now, but we expect that without some storms, before this year is out, that flow will probably be halved again. We'll probably be at the minimum allowable under State Board Decision 893, and the flow in the river will be 250 cubic feet per second. And it will be a very inhospitable environment for our salmonid species. So that's the problem. What are we doing about it? We are doing some things. This is a map of the San Juan Water District service area. San Juan's retail customers are in green up here in the upper right. The blue is Citrus Heights Water District. Orange is Orangevale Water Company. Pink is Fair Oaks. Those latter three are San Juan's wholesale customers. They buy water from San Juan Wholesale. These folks, prior to the drought, worked out an agreement that said if they ever found themselves in this position, these folks down here, the blue, orange, and pink, would switch to groundwater. And some of them have their own wells. Some of them will be sharing wells with their neighboring districts. So that the part up here in the Granite Bay area which currently has no physical ability to move groundwater into its area, can use the limited surface water supplies. In addition to using their own wells, and the wells, their own wells meaning of those three folks, they're also working on agreements which require purchasing additional pumps and other appurtenances to purchase water from Sac Suburban Water District. Another form of using groundwater to get through this year. It's this really serious stuff. It's never been done before. Many of these schemes to move water around from where there is some to where there may be none have been previously envisioned. And some of the investments to make them happen have already taken place, but not all of them. For instance, there is a cooperative transmission pipeline that runs from the Sac Suburban area up to Granite Bay, but it does not have sufficient pumps to move the water uphill. It's been used in the past to move water downhill. What else are we doing? Virtually every water supplier in this region has announced a 20% reduction in demand. Some of them have called it a voluntary reduction. Some of them have called it a mandatory reduction. Frankly, the nuances of what makes it voluntary and mandatory are not a bright line. Bottom line, the folks who may run out of surface water are taking this very seriously. City of Sacramento is one of them. City of Sacramento, last week or the week before, their council passed a mandatory 20% reduction. That does not mean individual homes will have an allocation. That means that they're going to step up monitoring and patrolling, and they will make sure that people do not water during this time of year on any day other than Saturday and Sunday. They will be handing out fines. They will be attempting to provide people with information so they can use their water without wasting it, without running it off, without over-applying. The three entities you see in pink highlighter are the ones that take their water out of Folsom Reservoir, and they're in the most dire straits. If the reservoir drops low enough, and to answer the question about when that could happen, it could happen as soon as 3 months, depending on what happens upstream. They would literally be out of water. Because that situation is so dire, they are moving into a full scarcity mode. San Juan Water District has already announced something they call a voluntary 50% reduction, and that includes voluntary prohibition of outdoor watering. I think it is very realistic to say that if we don't have significant storms, you will see a prohibition on outdoor water use in all three of those entities. City of Roseville, City of Folsom, and the Granite Bay area. It's a big deal. It's something we have never experienced before. This illustrates what San Juan is attempting to do with their demand reduction scheme. The blue and the red bars are 2 different years of annual water use, water production or water use. The green line is what they're trying to hold their water use to. The only way for them to do that is to prohibit outdoor watering. It's the only way that you can get there. We have problems with our fishery as well. And so what are we doing about that? Well, we are aggressively monitoring the situation. That doesn't sound like an action, but it is an action. The recent flow reductions, before the flow reductions happened, we had engineers and scientists that used hydrologic models that we'd already invested in, who were able to tell us very quickly that the expected number of redds dewatered from that action would be about 12% of the redds in the gravel. I'm talking about the salmon nests that were created as part of the 2013 fall run salmon, Chinook salmon run. Once the flow, and as the flow went down, we brought monitoring teams out there every day to survey the dewatered redds so that we could validate the model and so that we could respond to our constituency and let them know what the dewatering actually was. Now that they've been dewatered, and by the way, our field monitoring came up with a number of 11% dewatered, 12% from a model, 11% from the actual measurements. Now that those redds have been dewatered, and by the way, 11 and 12% doesn't sound like a lot, but it has my environmental community freaked out. It's a big deal to them. Now that the redds have been dewatered, we have additional field crews out measuring water quality in the gravel, in the redds themselves. Because dewatered red doesn't necessarily mean dead salmon eggs. Whether or not they survive depends on how much water flows through, what the level of dissolved oxygen is, what the turbidity is, etc. We're also measuring things like water temperature out there. Part of the reason we're doing those measurements is to let our folks know what the impacts are. We're also laying the groundwork for potential future cuts so we can understand those when they happen. And finally, what we're doing is we've assembled our own biologists and the biologists from Bureau of Reclamation, NOAA Fisheries, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, California Fish and Wildlife Service. We're meeting with those folks on a weekly basis to discuss what we're learning on a day-to-day basis, but to also come up with anything that we can do with our meager water supply upstream to minimize the harm to salmonids. The salmonids are going to take a hit this year. The name of the game at this point is to try to minimize the damage. This is a colored graph that indicates the darkest color is the highest concentration of fish. Each line, I don't expect you to read it, each line there is a different life stage. The upper half of the graph is fall run Chinook salmon. The lower half of the graph is steelhead. We expect that, first of all, the flows will probably be reduced to 250 cubic feet per second, and that's a big deal. We haven't seen flows that low since '77. It's a big deal. And we don't know when it will happen, but if things don't get better, it is inevitable. Reclamation is doing a really valiant job of holding the flow at 500 now, partly because that helps the city of Sacramento, but also because we don't want to damage the remaining Chinook salmon redds in the river. We also want to allow the steelhead who are spawning now to complete their spawning. Whether the flow is reduced or not, we will have virtually no cold water pool to work with in Folsom Reservoir this year. The device used to manage cold water pool, the so-called temperature control device, will not even be operable this year. It won't even be able to install it. So we will basically be stuck with whatever temperature the river warms up to at ambient conditions. That means that once it starts getting hot in May, the conditions for our salmonids will be, my fisheries biologists would caution me not to say deadly. They would say extremely inhospitable. There will not be very many salmonids in the American River that survive this summer, is the way it looks. One of the things that we're also talking about with this group of biologists is, can we shave a little of the flow off now or in the next few weeks and use it for a pulse flow in February? The science says that pulse flows in February help our fall run. We have something like 80% of the fall run out of the gravel, helps them out migrate. And possibly another pulse flow right before either it gets hot or before another drastic flow change happens. So if we do that, we can get our 2013 fall run hatchlings out of the river, many of them. We can get our steelhead, our single year class steelhead out of the river. But the oversummering steelhead and the young of year steelhead may not survive the summer. Our biologists tell us that that's really bad. It's really bad for the continued survival of those species. But an isolated year like this probably does not mean extirpation. 2 years in a row definitely pushes us in that direction. So we're beginning to think not just about 1 year of drought, but multi-years. So finally, another thing that is happening in the region, while we're in the middle of, frankly, scrambling to respond to current situations, we're also beginning to think about accelerating investments in some long-term projects. And by long-term projects, what's been envisioned in the region for a long time is the ability to move water from west to east, all the way from the Sacramento River up to those areas that are that are dependent on Folsom Reservoir storage. Moving water from Sacramento County and Sac Suburban into a big cooperative transmission pipeline, moving water from Sacramento County south of the river up to the city of Folsom. And frankly, if we do it right, it's not just moving the water one direction, it's moving the water two directions so that we don't just tap the groundwater in difficult times. It allows us to do conjunctive use, true conjunctive use, utilize abundant surface water in the wet times, keep our groundwater in a balanced condition, which it currently is in. Just to sum up, it's an unprecedented situation. Never seen it before. Some of our previous investments in hardware and in cooperation are really paying off. This crazy experiment called the Water Forum has proven to be really invaluable. We began meeting in something we call a conference session back in December. Our last session was held a couple of weeks ago. We had 75 members present, virtually every water provider in the region, and most of the local environmental community were present to talk about how to fix this. And it's really gratifying to see folks who often have fundamental value differences about how to use the water resource talk about how to share the pain. Talk about the fact that we're all in a world of hurt and we're going to try to make this work. Finally, we are talking about long-term investments. I heard someone recently say, never let a good crisis go to waste. And if this is an opportunity for us to communicate to the ratepayers, property owners in this region, that some long-term drought-proof investments are a good idea, then maybe that can be one of the silver linings of this crisis. That's all I have.